David Cronenberg has said that Scanners was his most difficult film to make. There was barely a script when the film went into production, which meant Cronenberg had to flesh out scenes and story beats when the cameras weren't rolling. Making a film under these conditions can be extremely problematic, and honestly, Scanners might have been a complete failure if it was directed by anyone else. But this is David Cronenberg we're talking about, a director who has been called the Baron of Blood and the King of Venereal Horror. And when you give David Cronenberg $2 million to make a film about telepathic violence, good results are pretty much guaranteed. This grisly spectacle of telepathic carnage was instrumental in Scanner's success at the box office. Instead of keeping the head explosion under wraps, the marketing team used the entire scene for the film's theatrical trailer, with only minor frame drops from the actual cranial detonation. This not-so-secret marketing technique turned out to be a stroke of genius, and the horror fans of 1981 were left captivated by the promise of gory special effects. The mastermind behind Scanner's final act latex savagery is a legendary Dick Smith, who is often referred to as the godfather of makeup. One of Smith's most celebrated contributions to the art form is his innovative use of air bladders. The first time he used this effect was for a brief shot of Linda Blair's expanding throat in William Friedkin's The Exorcist. 7 years later, he demonstrated a complete mastery of the technique in Ken Russell's psychedelic thriller, Altered States. In Scanners, Smith takes a different approach with this method and uses liquid to inflate the air bladders as opposed to compressed air. The resulting effect is something that can only be described as hideously beautiful. Watching fake blood seep through artificial veins and then erupt in razor-thin streams is one of the most riveting experiences Scanners has to offer, and these pulsating effects would go on to become one of the signature features of the entire series, for better or worse. While Scanners is mostly known for its violent visuals, the aspect of the film that deserves just as much love is its use of sound. In fact, Scanners is the best demonstration since Fritz Lang's M of why sound is critical to the cinematic experience as a whole. Before M's release in 1931, most sound films or talkies of the 1920s featured a very basic usage of sound. And while this new technology was a huge hit with audiences, some felt the addition of sound was nothing more than a cheap parlor trick that would have little impact on the language of cinema. This skepticism was put to rest when Fritz Lang introduced movie audiences to Hans Beckert, a child murderer who has a habit of whistling Edvard Grieg's in the Hall of the Mountain King when hunting his victims. This scene proves that sound can serve a higher function than simply providing a film an auditory atmosphere. It can also drive the narrative by expanding the film space beyond the limitations of the visible frame. For this reason, M was one of the first films that demanded the incorporation of sound, so much so that the film would be rendered incomprehensible if it were absent. Just like M, Scanners is a film that is defined by its codependent relationship of image and sound. Apart from a couple scenes that feature gory special effects, sound design is the film's primary weapon in conveying the animosity of the Scanner's cerebral warfare. The resulting soundscape is unnerving, oppressive, and an absolute feast for the ears. For scenes that show characters interacting telepathically, the sound design veers into experimental territory, with its heavy use of droning notes and sound distortion. And while these sound effects are essentially noise, the way in which they're constructed makes them sound organic and living. The other aspect of Scanner's sound that deserves to be mentioned is the excellent soundtrack provided by Howard Shore. As is the case with most of his collaborations with Cronenberg, Shore delivers a composition characterized by powerful string arrangements that are just as menacing as they are beautiful. At the same time, his soundtrack is filled with these incredibly dense synthesizer textures that reinforce the aggressive sounds of the Scanner signals. While the use of sound is one of the most fascinating elements of Scanners, it is also the source of my biggest criticism of the film. The one sound that plagues the entire film is the bizarre and unnatural line delivery of the lead actor.
Good evening, sir. Can I help you?
Are there any messages for me?
Your name, sir?
Cameron Vale.
And your room number?
802.
Stephen Lack certainly has the expressive features of a movie star, and he even does a fine job at communicating the physical and mental agony of the scanning process. That being said, every time the film requires him to talk, his voice sounds like something you would hear in an English dub of an Italian movie.
I've heard you know a man named Daryl Revick. My name is Cameron Vale. I've got to talk to Kim Obrist.
Everywhere you go, somebody dies. Who are you? Who sent you?
I'm a scanner.
Who sent you?
Another reason why Lack's wooden performance sticks out like a sore thumb is due to the fact that Scanner's supporting cast is far superior. Patrick McGoohan is effortlessly stoic, Robert A. Silverman is delightfully weird as always, and Michael Ironside is the physical embodiment of ferocity. His performance as Daryl Revick is so iconic that his image is virtually synonymous with the entire franchise. It almost makes me feel bad for Stephen Lack during the final showdown, because Michael Ironside outperforms him to such a degree that it makes Lack seem like a shot rehearsal stand-in.
You shouldn't mourn a good doctor's death. You should celebrate it with me.
Dr. Ruth was a great man. He tried to help us. He helped me.
With all that said, Stephen Lack's awkward performance isn't the only shortcoming in Scanners. I mentioned earlier that Cronenberg was very much under the gun when writing the script, and this is most evident in the film's narrative flow and character development. While the film does feature some impressive low-budget action set pieces, these scenes act as bookends to an overwhelming amount of scenes of characters just talking to one another. Don't get me wrong, I'm all about dialogue-heavy scenes that inform the audience about character motivations, but this is rarely the case for Scanners. Apart from some scenes involving Daryl Revick, most of the dialogue in Scanners functions as a way to give viewers some form of clarity of the film's sequence of events. Because of this, the viewing experience of Scanners will at times be an endurance test for less patient audience members who are looking for non-stop thrills. The other downside of Scanners' script is that the film doesn't spend enough time fleshing out its characters. Besides Daryl Revick, most of the characters in Scanners don't have a lot of depth to them, and character arcs for the most part are non-existent. The absence of these qualities makes the characters feel artificial, regardless of how well the actors perform their roles. Still, even though the script doesn't meet the normal standards of a typical screenplay, Cronenberg manages to make up for these shortcomings by injecting the material with his unmistakable brand of artistry. While Scanners is just as body horrific as his earlier works when it comes to the visuals, the thing that sets Scanners apart is the way he uses language to evoke the physicality of telepathy. The best example of this is the way in which Dr. Ruth instructs Cameron Vale on how to use his powers. Instead of asking Cameron to simply read people's minds, he tells him to send out a scanner signal by merging his nervous system with his intended target. This merging of nervous systems leads me into my final point on why Scanners is one of the most important films in Cronenberg's body of work. Along with body horror and identity, one of the most prevalent themes in Cronenberg's films is a union of mankind with technology. And while his later films are better encapsulations of this theme, this concept was first introduced in Scanners, when Cameron uses a payphone to merge his nervous system with a computer. The scene is absolutely thrilling, and it serves as an excellent first taste of Cronenberg's fascination with humanity's fusion with technology.
See? I told you. No fireworks.
The release of the Scanner sequels is something that I don't think anyone saw coming. What's even more surprising is the fact that they came out a decade after the original film's release. I suspect the person responsible for the Scanners revival was Pierre David, who served as executive producer for the original film, as well as other classics like The Brood, Videodrome, and Kid Cop. The first sequel, titled Scanners 2: The New Order, stars David Hewlett as a 10-year-old boy named David Kellum, who discovers he has scanner abilities shortly after enrolling into veterinary school. When I first started watching Scanners 2, I was under the assumption that David was around 20 years old, given his mature skeletal structure and his ability to operate a motor vehicle. However, I began to doubt my initial theory when the film reveals that David was adopted, and that his actual birth parents are Cameron Vale and Kim Obrist from the first film. What makes matters even more confusing is the 10 years later tagline on the film's promotional material, which seems to be referencing the narrative timeline of the Scanners universe as opposed to the release gap between the two films. With all this evidence in mind, I feel the only logical conclusion is that David is indeed 10 years old. Unfortunately, David's aggressive aging mutation is the only interesting thing about him, continuing the Scanners trend of the antagonist being far more intriguing than the central character. In fact, Raul Trujillo's performance as Drac is so good he gives Michael Ironside a run for his money for the title of series best villain.
Hello? Sheriff's office. Is there anyone there? Hello? Is that you, please? Hey, what the hell's going on there? Speak to me!
Sorry, she can't talk right now.
The only mark against his character is the way he's written as a thuggish muscle, who ultimately serves the film's true villain, Commander John Forrester. Still, Trujillo absolutely owns the B-movie level villainy, and his performance is easily one of the best parts of the film. And even though Commander Forrester isn't as enthralling as Drac, I feel his motivation to use scanners for his own political gain was a logical next step for the Scanners narrative. To be honest, the good scanner versus bad scanner plotline from the first film is as basic as it gets, and the formula reinvention was absolutely necessary to justify the creation of a sequel. The other element that sees reinvention are the scanner abilities, and the results are both good and bad. One of the film's most creative uses of scanning is the way David and his sister Julie can combine their forces to use other characters as telepathic surrogates. On the lesser side of things, having David use telepathy for sexual recreation is absolutely juvenile, especially when you consider David's young age.
Relax. I want to try something.
While this scene is pretty obnoxious, it's not nearly as bad as the scenes that showcase the telekinetic aspects of the scanning process. Even though the first Scanners did have some brief moments of characters being thrown back by scanner forces, I feel the primary focus was the telepathic violence, as opposed to the telekinetic violence. In Scanners 2, these telekinetic forces show up on a regular basis, and at times the execution of these scenes is absolutely cartoonish. Ultimately, this dramatic tonal shift is the main reason why Scanners 2 fails at being a proper Scanners sequel. Even though Christian DeGuy is competent at directing action and fully embraces the franchise's legacy of brutal head explosions, his directing style is less functional when it comes to capturing the horror elements of Cronenberg's original concept. Still, even though Scanners 2 action movie qualities are in direct conflict with the thematic core of the original, Scanners 2 is actually pretty enjoyable, and by no means is it the worst sequel. That honor belongs to Scanners 3. I honestly don't even know how to begin to describe the colossal disaster that is Scanners 3. The film was directed by the same director as Scanners 2, but you wouldn't know this if his name wasn't included with the credits. While Scanners 2 was a straight-to-video release, the film is definitely of a higher quality than the typical schlock that defines the brand. In the case of Scanners 3: The Takeover, Christian DeGuy manages to deliver a product that you would most likely find in a truck stop movie bin in the middle of nowhere. The film is loaded with laughable cliches, cheap-looking special effects, and healthy amounts of mustache-twirling villainy. Just like Scanners 2, Scanners 3 suffers from a profound identity crisis when it comes to tone, so much so that the film feels less like a Scanners movie and more like a trauma movie. And not even a good trauma movie.
Well. What do we have here? Boys, I think we've got us a rapist.
Oh, come on, Mitch. He was willing.
Not you, Nimbo Bimbo. Him.
Me? What's going on around here?
The one story element that carries over from the previous two films is the abuse of the scanner drug ephemeral. In the Scanners film world, ephemeral was a drug designed to be a mild sedative for pregnant women. Unfortunately, the one side effect of the drug was the telepathic mutation in unborn children. In Scanners 2, a new variant of the drug known as F2 was created to help relieve scanners who were unable to block out the endless voices that are heard in their heads. F2 is far more addictive than the original ephemeral, and Commander Forrester takes advantage of this to control and even imprison his scanner agents. The third film introduces yet another version of the drug, and I'm pretty sure you can guess what it's called. Just like F2, F3 is an experimental scanner sedative being developed by Dr. Elton Monet, and even though it hasn't been tested, his daughter Helena takes the drug in a desperate attempt to get rid of her scanner symptoms and post-traumatic stress. While F3 cures Helena of her pain, it also turns her into a homicidal maniac, which is the biggest cop-out in terms of creating a motivation for your antagonists.
You were always a brat. And I can see now that things haven't changed.
Now, you know, Doctor, it's not polite to point.
Where the hell did you get the idea that you could waltz
I
just
said
sit here
here.
and...
It's not polite to point.
Her nefarious plan is just as stupid, and it involves broadcasting a televised scanner signal during a championship football game with the intent of achieving mind control over millions of viewers. No joke. Someone actually wrote that. The only person capable of stopping her is her adopted brother Alex, who spent half of the film learning to focus his powers at a monastery in Thailand. Just like the films that came before it, Scanners 3 reaches its climax with a violent scanner battle between Helena and Alex. The scene is an absolute embarrassment, not just to the Scanners name, but movies in general. At this moment, you might be asking yourself, how did this happen? What would make a group of filmmakers take a beloved property and then proceed to drive it directly into the ground? Regrettably, this bastardization of subject matter is all too common, and there are several film trilogies that bear a striking resemblance to the Scanners franchise. The most fitting comparison would be the evolution of the RoboCop series. Just like the Scanners franchise, the original was an excellent self-contained story that was lightning in a bottle when it was released. The second film demonstrated a complete misunderstanding of the source material and tried to make up for it by injecting the film with absurd levels of tongue-in-cheek. When it came time to make a third installment, the filmmakers were so creatively bankrupt that the film is nothing more than a cheap spectacle, defined by its idiotic creative endeavors. Instead of jetpacks and cyborg ninjas, the filmmakers of Scanners 3 gave us this instead.
And one more thing, I gotta dance!
And as much as I would like to say that Scanners 3 was the final nail in the coffin, the executive producer of the series felt there were more Scanner stories to tell. I'd like to think that after the release of Scanners 3, Pierre David asked himself one day,
what if a scanner was also a cop?
In 1993 and 1994, David answered this question with the release of the spin-off films Scanner Cop and Scanner Cop 2. To be completely honest, I didn't even see the original Scanners when I was a kid. My first official exposure to the series was actually Scanner Cop 2. Just like the Scanner sequels, the Scanner Cop films are artistically vapid, and to be frank, they're not even worth talking about. Still, if you're the type of person who enjoys low-budget trash cinema, the Scanner Cop films will definitely scratch that itch.